Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Pat Kelleher, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is our 2021 Summer Executive Committee meeting, and we do have a fairly light agenda. I'm going to ask for introductions today because we do have a new administrative commissioner with us. But before I do that, are there any additional items for this agenda that anybody might have? You can just speak up if you do.
Pat, this is Bob Beal.
Pat, I have one. Dennis Abbott. I'd like it bring up at the end of the meeting.
Okay, what is that, Dennis?
I'd like to talk about the process for conservation equivalencies moving in a little bit different direction. I'll explain it when we get to it.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. We just need the executive committee to consider approving a letter on the Recovering America's Wildlife Act to Senate side. We've already sent one over to the House side. We just need to sign off on the other version.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hearing none. What I would like to do, if we could, going from north to south, is just have the members of the executive committee introduce themselves. Once everybody knows where they are in the pecking order north to south. So once somebody goes, if the other person would just follow right along, the next person just follows right along, and I'll begin. My name is Patrick Kelleher, and I am the Commissioner at the Maine Department of Marine Resources and the Chair of the Commission.
Good morning. This is Cherie Patterson with the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, and I'm the Chief of the Marine Fisheries Division.
I'm Dennis Abbott. I am the Legislative Chairman and Proxy Commissioner for State of New Hampshire.
Good morning. I am Daniel McKiernan, the Director at the Division of Marine Fisheries in Massachusetts.
Morning, Jason McNamee. I am the Deputy Director here at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management.
Connecticut? No, Connecticut. We'll skip over Connecticut. New York?
I didn't see Jim as either.
Okay, we'll skip over New York. New Jersey?
Here, Pat. Good morning. Joe Cimino. I'm New Jersey DEP's Marine Fisheries Administrator and Administrative Commissioner.
Hi, this is John Clark. I'm the Section Administrator for the Division of Fish and Wildlife here in the fabulous First State.
Good morning. Bill Anderson, Assistant Secretary, Maryland Department of Natural Resources.
Good morning. It's Pat here. I'm the Chief of Fisheries Management at the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, and I'm the Administrative Proxy for Steve Bowman, who's out with knee surgery today.
Morning, Chris Batsavage, serve as the Division of Marine Fisheries Director's proxy on the Mid-Atlantic Council and ASMFC, and also serve as a proxy on the Executive Committee.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy Rawls, and I am the Director at the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries, and I'm listening in today, and I'm looking forward to getting more involved with ASMFC and other council processes, and I'm glad to be here today.
Good morning, Mel Bell. I'm the Director, Office of Fisheries Management for South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and I'm the administrative proxy for Phil Mayer, who is the Director of the Marine Resources Division within the DNR.
Good morning, it's Bud Woodward. I'm the Governor's Appointee Commissioner for the state of Georgia and Vice Chair of the Commission.
Is Florida present? Three states not here. Okay, thank you very much. And Kathy, I want to welcome you to the commission. Oh, I heard somebody's jumping in.
Hey, Pat, this is Roy. I'm Roy Miller, governor's appointee from Delaware, and I represent the governor's appointees on the executive committee. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for jumping in, Roy.
Yeah,
last
one more, Pat. I was just going to say one more. Good morning. This is Chris Kuhn. I'm the Director of Fisheries for Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and Administrative Proxy for Executive Director Tim Schaefer.
And Pat, Justin Davis has joined us, and so is Jim Gilmore.
Gentlemen, if you could introduce yourselves, please.
Good morning, it's Justin Davis. I'm with Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection with the Fisheries Division. I'm the head of our Marine Fisheries Program and Connecticut's Administrative Commissioner.
And I'm Jim Gilmore. I'm the Director of the Marine Division for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
And we also have Brian McManus with Florida. Brian, your mic is open.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Sitting in for Jessica and Erica.
Great, thanks everybody. And Kathy, I want to welcome you to the commission. It's not easy, I'm sure, jumping in into a webinar where you can't see faces, but I just want to welcome you, and we look forward to meeting you in person at our annual meeting in October.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Let's jump right into the remainder of our agenda. The next item is the approval of the meeting summary for May 2021. Does anybody have any comments on the meeting summary? Hearing none, are there any objections to adopting the meeting summary? Hearing none, it's been adopted by consensus. The next item is for public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to comment on anything that is not on the agenda? Hearing none, we are going to move right down the agenda to the CARES Act update, and that's Bob Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to keep this brief and give plenty of time for questions. Really, there's no new changes or anything significantly different with CARES Act. Karen Abrams from NOAA Fisheries is here, so she can answer questions if you have any. But essentially where we are is about half of the states have their plans submitted and or approved, and the others are pending. We're working our way through the process there. And as of last Friday, the grant to ASMFC was awarded, and now we have access to the funds. So once the states have their spend plans and their recipients list together, we can start sending checks out whenever you're ready. I have received a few questions, sort of continual questions about the timeline. The end of September is written into the legislation, and the end of September is kind of breathing down our necks. The intent of Congress, as we've talked about, was to distribute the money and have it out in the hands of all the recipients by the end of September, so less than 2 months from now. However, as I've talked to many of you, and we've had these discussions at the executive committee before, that's just unrealistic for a number of states. So, the message is essentially, the intent and the desire is to get the money out as quickly as possible. However, if states are not able to get the money out by the end of September, the money is not going to disappear. The federal government's not going to recall that money and take it away from us or anything along those lines. We'll probably need to provide some justification from time to time on why the money hasn't gone out and what the status is for any states that haven't been able to distribute the money yet. But the ASMFC, as I said a minute ago, has access to the funds. Those funds are not going to go away magically at the end of September. We'll have a number of months to get have those funds sent out to the folks that need the money, as well as some of the other marketing ideas and other things that the states have come up with and included in their sort of second round spend plan. So, I think that nervousness about the money, hopefully, we can set aside some of those concerns by just the recognition that, we know there's a deadline written in the legislation. However, that we do have flexibility and we have time to kind of get it right and get the money out to the individuals and businesses that need it. And, states are asked to kind of work as quickly as possible. However, the money's not going away. So I think, Mr. Chairman, that's really my update. Other than that, let us know as you submit or, send your spend plans to us. We can forward those along to NOAA Fisheries for review and approval. And once you have your, list of recipients together and in the spreadsheet format that Laura needs, send them along. We'll start sending out checks. So we're ready to go and we have the money in hand, which is good news. So I think that's the update, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer questions, or as I said, Karen Abrams is also here to help out with questions if there are any.
Great, thanks, Bob. Does anybody have any questions of Bob or for Karen?
Joe and Cherie both have their hands raised.
Great, thank you. We'll start with Joe.
Hey, Pat, I hope this is an easy one. I was thinking about sending an email to Kelly, but maybe I can get it answered here. We've had the back and forth with NOAA, and if Laura's been to formally submit our plan, I'm just curious on timing, like how long has it been taking to get the formal approval so that we can do all our press releases and everything like that? Thanks.
Bob or
yeah, I'll chime in, Pat. Joe, I think it's been a couple weeks, depending obviously on the number of iterations that go back and forth between the state and NOAA Fisheries, and if there are questions and things that need to be adjusted. But a couple weeks is probably a reasonable timeline. In defense of NOAA Fisheries, if you're listening to Paul DeRemus earlier this week, they had 84 spend plans with CARES Act, or with, so far that they've had to approve. So they've got a pretty full plate of spend plans over there. But, I think count on a couple of weeks, unless you have a number of iterations, then it may take a little bit longer.
Pat, Karen also has her hand raised.
Great, Karen.
Karen, you're unmuted on our end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Karen, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Bob's right. We are trying to turn those spend plans around as quickly as possible. And it's been going pretty quickly. I think we've reviewed a couple of versions of the New Jersey plan, and it looks like actually that is moving along quite fast. I expect you're going to, if you haven't heard back from us soon, once it goes into our grant specialists, they have been fast tracking those spend plans. So the lengthy review process, I'm doing air quotes, the couple of weeks is between us and your folks. And once it gets to our grants specialists, they do move it along in a fairly expedited manner. So I expect that to be done very shortly.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Yeah, no, it's great. We have had 2 reviews, and they said do the formal submittal. It's been incredibly helpful, and I appreciate it. Thank you. And I just want to say hi to Kathy Rawls. Wish I could see you in person.
Pat, this is Laura.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Joe, you were approved on Monday afternoon. I've got a copy of the email that was sent Monday, actually morning at 11:38. NOAA approves New Jersey spend plan under CARES 2.0. So you've been approved. And you were copied on this, so I don't know if you didn't get it or it got lost in the huge amount of mail you get, but you're approved.
No, yeah, I guess no, it was just a misunderstanding then. Thank you. I did realize that we were good to go. I didn't realize that, I thought there still might have been some formal thing that has to happen after it goes into grants.gov.
Yeah.
That's all.
Probably from the sentence that says once awarded, ASMFC has the green light to upload your plan to grants online. I've already done that too, so you're good to go.
Thank you so much, everyone.
You're welcome.
Look at that. Perfect. Thank you. Cherie Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions were actually answered during these conversations, so thank you.
Oh, perfect. Tina, any other hands?
No hands.
All right. So hearing or seeing no other hands, let's move right along to the next agenda item, which is a report from the Administrative Oversight Committee. That's Bud Woodward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be quick. The Administrative Oversight Committee was unable to find a meeting time that worked for everybody's calendar to discuss the reserve fund and the investment policy. So I don't have anything to report to the XCOM. However, we will be meeting between now and the annual meeting. We'll discuss that, bring it back to the XCOM with any recommendations at the same time that we discuss the audit and as well as the action plan. So I appreciate the forbearance to the XCOM on this, and I'll be glad to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Great, thanks for that quick updates, Bud. So with the Administrative Oversight Committee reporting back in October, is there any additional questions or items that anybody wants to raise for Spud?
I don't see any hands, Pat.
All right. Well, let's move right along then with the agenda. The next agenda item is to discuss the annual meetings attendance and future meeting formats. And we'll go back to the Executive Director, Bob Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on the direction or request from the Executive Committee, Laura and I sent out a brief email asking about folks' interest and ability to attend the annual meeting in October, and we got, I think my current count is 34 responses from commissioners and proxies, and each individual that responded said yes, they plan to attend the annual meeting in person, and no, they do not have any travel restrictions at the state level at that time. It's probably worth noting, unfortunately, that our email survey went out about 2 days before the CDC sort of came back with new mask guidance and concern about the Delta variant and all these other things. And almost every one of the 34 responses that we had included some sort of caveat that said, well, as of right now, I want to come to the annual meeting in person and we don't have travel restrictions. However, we're going to keep an eye on things, and if things change, my response to these questions might change. So I guess the bottom line, Mr. Chair, is that, obviously folks want to get back together. They're ready to do it. They're probably tired of this format. However, they want to, keep an eye on things and decide as we get a little bit closer to the annual meeting what the right thing to do is. And I don't, surely none of us on the phone can predict what's going to happen in 1 month or two. But it's a clear message. Folks want to get back together, whether we're really comfortable with it or not in 2 to 3 months. That's another question. So that's a quick summary of that survey. Happy to talk about other concepts of future meetings and hybrid things and all those different pieces if anyone would like to talk about that now. But it sounded like kind of talking through the annual meeting format's probably a good place to start.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, things are certainly changing since we last discussed the need to do the survey and sending the survey out. I know in a cabinet meeting yesterday here in Maine, there was conversations about needing to go back and review some of the authorizations for out-of-state travel. There's been no change yet, but it's certainly being looked at depending upon the severity of the spread of the Delta variant. So we've probably all got a lot of what ifs, but I think what I'd like to do is just ask Joe for an update on New Jersey, if there's anything changing there that we should know about.
Not yet, no. Again, no travel restrictions or travel bans. We, as state employees, are expressing high caution. We're still, although you aren't required to wear masks indoors, state employees are if they're in close proximity to each other, but not at their desks. So it's a weird mix ever since this latest bit of news. But I will Pat, I will keep you and Bob and Laura informed of any changes that might arise.
Great, thanks, Joe. Does any member of the executive committee have any comments on kind of either the annual meeting or future meetings?
Pat, Dennis, I noted that next week the Mid-Atlantic Council has gone to a non-in-person. I was wondering what led up to that. It must be what we're just talking about.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any details. Bob, did you? I saw that was changed, but have you received any details?
Not many details other than the email they sent out said the conditions in Philadelphia where they intended to meet had changed, and they felt the safest thing to do is to switch to all virtual. So not a lot of details, just a precautionary change, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Pat, you have a number of hands raised, starting with Jim Gilmore, Mel Bell, and then Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Tina. Jim Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of thoughts or questions on it. First off, I guess when we would have to cancel for the annual meeting would be, I guess, a key point in this. From the New York perspective, it looks like from our staffing that we're going to be going to a staff in the office if they're vaccinated and wearing a mask. So that might be something we may want to consider, although I know there's a whole lot of different opinions about that with different states. But I still think my preference would be to do a hybrid, because I still plan on attending. I'm vaccinated, I'd wear a mask, so I have no problem doing that. Again, we'll have to wait and see what the unfolding guidance is. But again, when we have to cancel, I think would really be a key date on it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Bob and I certainly discussed that. There'd be some financial obligations if we did cancel at this point in time as well. So my feeling is that the executive committee is likely going to have a few calls in the interim between now and the annual meeting to follow what's happening and make a call one way or another at a certain point. So this will be a topic that will continue to be discussed. Mel Bell.
Yeah, I was just going to weigh in on from the council perspective. I know RED talked to Chris Moore, and in terms of, and of course Mike can speak to the mid, but we've got a meeting in South Atlantic that's still scheduled for in-person mid-September. But I think what folks are probably doing is just looking at the local numbers and assessing what's going on in that particular environment, and that may have had something to do with the mids needing to go virtual. And we've kind of got a plan B in place ourselves. So fortunately, we've become pretty proficient in the virtual world, but hopefully things will work out. But it's just watching the local data, I think, is what folks are looking at a lot.
Thanks, Mel. Mike, before I go to you, are there any other members of the executive committee that have comments?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, great. Mike Luisi.
How you doing, Mr. Chairman? And good morning, everybody. Yeah, Mel basically said what it is that we did in the mid. We kind of waited till the last minute. We were tracking the news in Philadelphia, and there were just major spikes in COVID cases, and people started to back out. They didn't want to come to the city, so that was the reason why we canceled the in-person hybrid style meeting for next week, and we're just going to do it virtually. We're gonna keep an eye on New York for October, as well as Annapolis for December, and just play it by ear and see how things go. But we do want to get back together, as everyone does. But the Philadelphia just was a hot spot, and we didn't want to bring people there and put them in harm's way. So that was the decision-making process to get to Dennis's point. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. As I said, we've got a lot to consider, I think, going forward. Before we jump to the next agenda item, Bob, have you and staff talk through the logistics of the hybrid meeting approach? pros and cons, technical difficulties? Do we need any additional technical expertise for that type of approach?
Yeah, Pat, we've talked about it a little bit. We haven't gone into great detail yet since we're sort of theoretical. But I think no matter what shakes out, we're going to have some portion of the meeting at the annual meeting in a hybrid format, so we can start digging into that. Some of the questions out there are, does each person need their own microphone? Can we share microphones? If we need one mic per person, we'll need to get more of those. We can probably rent those from the hotel. So there's a number of things we've thought about. We just haven't made any decisions or purchase any equipment or anything like that, just because everything keeps changing as fast as we think we're catching up with what we need to do. But we'll work on that. And we are also hoping, the Mid-Atlantic or South Atlantic or someone else would be kind of the guinea pig and see how it worked out for them, and we could take some of their good ideas. But we'll see how that goes. Hopefully the South Atlantic will be able to get together in Charleston.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. It's going to be interesting, and I think kind of thinking back to Jim Gilmore's comment around what they're doing in New York, Maine, as of last Monday, state offices, if you've been vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. But in order to show proof of vaccination, you had to actually download your vaccination card. So if complaints were made on an individual, you could actually have some fallback to it. So I think probably as the executive committee, we're going to need to think about what that will look like for our meeting. We're all probably have different rules that we're following, at least the administrative commissioners. So we'll need to think through what that's going to look like for us for the meeting for sure. So Tina, any other hands?
No, Pat.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we'll be talking about this one a lot more, I'm sure, between now and October. So let's just move along to the next agenda item, which is discuss pending shark finning legislations. And Deke, I believe you are doing the update on this one.
That's right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the legislative committee, as recently as July 19th, discussed several of the shark fin conservation legislation that's active in the 117 Congress. There's several bills that have been introduced, but I think it helps to think about them in two categories. The first is a prohibition on shark fin possession. And the second category is import certification. So the bill probably with the most momentum is the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act. That's HR 2811 in the House, introduced by Rep. Sablon from the Northern Mariana Islands, with 177 co-sponsors. In the Senate, it's S1106. By Senator Booker, and that bill was actually folded into the Endless Frontier Act, which is a manufacturing China competition bill, and that was passed by the Senate. So it's done in the Senate. So that bill is tucked into a 1,000-page bill over there. But the Shark Fin Sales Elimination Act prohibits the possession, transportation, sale, and purchase of shark fins or products containing shark fins. And there is an exemption for fresh or frozen raw fin or tail from spiny and smooth dogfish. And that is in effect until January 1st, 2027, with possibility to be extended by the Secretary of Commerce. And then the last piece is there's subsistence, display, or research exemptions. And then the other category of bill that I mentioned is the Sustainable Shark Fisheries and Trade Act. And that's S1372 in the Senate, sponsored by Senator Rubio with 3 co-sponsors, and HR 3360 in the House by Rep. Rutherford of Florida with 9 co-sponsors. And that bill requires certification that a nation prohibits shark finning and has management policies comparable to the Magnuson-Stevens Act in order to import shark products from that country into the U.S. So that's a quick overview of the legislation and where they stand, and happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Deke. Deke, does the legislative committee have any favorites here of these pieces of legislation that you've discussed? Is there any work or any endorsements that we need, send letters on any of this, or is this strictly just an update at this time?
I think I may let Spud speak to that, but I think there was a lot of concern from the legislative committee about prohibition on possession of fins, just because it's not sound conservation policy to discard those fins. And there was some interest in the Sustainable Shark Fisheries and Trade Act, but there was no formal recommendation from the legislative committee. They wanted to kick it up to the executive committee for further discussion.
Great, thanks. Spud, do you want to weigh in on this before I open it up for additional hands?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Deke pretty well summarized our discussions at the legislative committee level. But yeah, I think there is, there's great concern that just across the board elimination of sales from otherwise lawfully harvested sharks, the large coastal, small coastals, is just promoting waste without really accruing any benefit at all. So while we didn't take formal action or make a recommendation, I personally think that it would be appropriate for the commission to weigh in support of the letter bill that Deke described. I think that one certainly gets to the heart of the matter and doesn't have the consequences of promoting waste and diminishing profitability in what are probably the best managed shark fisheries in the world. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Bud. Any questions of Deke or for Spud?
I don't see any hands raised.
No hands, great. It sounds like from my standpoint, unless the executive committee wants to take it in a different direction, that you guys have a pretty good pulse on these pieces of legislation, and unless there's objections to Spud's comments, Spud or Deke's comments, let's let the executive committee continue to keep an eye on these, and if at any time the executive committee feels a letter or additional input needs to be made by the commissioner or the executive committee, we can raise it at one of our interim meetings. Does that sound good? Not hearing any objections. Let's take it in that direction. Thanks, Deke. Thanks, Spud. While we're dealing with legislation and knowing that we are getting into other business, why don't we first start with the RAWA letter that Bob, you mentioned earlier, that we need to potentially send to the Senate or the House, I think.
You got it right, Senate. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Executive Committee approved a letter of support for the Recovering America's Wildlife Act to be sent to the House side. The legislation was introduced on the Senate side in, I think, the 15th of July by Senators Heinrich from New Mexico and Blunt from Missouri. It's pretty similar language to what was in the House version. It's, $1.3 billion to supplement, not supplant, funding for that goes out to the states to address endangered species and wildlife management issues. It's noted that it does not affect Dingell Johnson or Pittman Robertson. The big hang up on the Senate side was the financial offset. Where does $1.3 billion come from? And the bill includes language that funds the activities essentially through penalties from environmental violations. So if there's an environmental violation that has a financial penalty associated with it from any federal agency, and if that financial penalty is not already earmarked for some direct payment or direct restoration from the violation, then that money would go into sort of a RAWA fund, if you want to call it that, and then it would be distributed out to the states for their activities. So since we've already sent one letter, I think what we'd like to do is just, Deke has already done it, change the addresses on the letter, and he put some information or just another sentence or two in the letter about, the importance of not affecting current funding streams to the states, and the notion of supplementing current funding is important rather than just changing the source of the existing funding, because that doesn't get the states anywhere. So that's the background. Just a quick approval for a letter to Senate side is all we need right now.
Great, thanks, Bob. And just to add to that, our lobbyists have been engaged on this particular issue. So I think we've been, between staff and the lobbyists, we've been well represented on the Hill on this issue. So any questions of Bob or any objections to sending this letter as described?
No hands, Pat.
No hands. Then I'll take that as no objection, and Bob will indeed will finalize the letter for my signature, and we'll get it out as soon as we can. Perfect. So that takes care of the first item of new business or other business, and the next item is the process for conservation equivalency. Dennis, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Pat. Yesterday during the striped bass meeting, we had a presentation by the PDT, and they had a lot of questions about moving forward with conservation equivalency as they're wrestling with how to solve our dilemmas or whatever with striped bass. And it occurred to me that maybe we should consider a different path to improving the process. And probably should we not consider having a commission-wide conservation equivalency policy? Because I think that whatever we ultimately do with striped bass could affect conservation equivalencies with other species that desire using conservation equivalency. It'll be one of the things that they can look at and say, well, we did it here, we did it there. So my question is, should we consider establishing a commission-wide conservation equivalency program? Remove the conservation equivalency details from the management plans, and in a management plan, just refer to a document that would be prepared by the commission, and that document could be worked on and brought to us by staff, the knowledgeable people that deal with conservation equivalencies, and deal with how you go about it, what your requirements are for conservation equivalency, so on and so forth. Many things that I can't even discuss, but I just thought, again, listening to the conversation yesterday, that we should think about having a species, not all species, but I mean a commission-wide conservation equivalency program, rather than dealing with it, one species at a time when necessary. That's what I was thinking about, and I'd just like to throw that out there for food for thought for all you learned persons that deal with this every day.
Thanks, Dennis. Certainly, conservation equivalency has taken on a new meaning for a lot of people, a lot of members of the public. We do have a conservation equivalency policy and technical guidance that was developed, I think, in the early 2000s and revised back in, I think, 2016. Are you thinking about something different than that type of a document? Are you thinking of a hard, fast policy on its use, or is this something you just want to try to have a broader conversation with, maybe revisiting the policy and technical guidance?
Well, I'm just thinking broadly. I hadn't even considered what we already have out there. There were so many questions raised, and maybe it's an opportunity to revisit what we have and do whatever. I'll let you guys think about that. I don't have any, real direction that I'm suggesting, but
Okay. Any other thoughts of the executive committee around what Dennis has put on the table?
Joe has his hand raised.
Joe Smino.
Thanks, Pat. Dennis kind of got ahead of me here. I had talked to Bob about this, that I was hoping to bring this to policy board to kind of dust off what we have on the books with that CE policy that, as you said, was revised in 2016. I had, kind of an overarching concern with striped bass. We had a very vocal group through the last round of public hearings. People think that means it's a representative of the majority of individuals that are represented in our fishing communities, and others not quite so much. We think that there are a lot of communities that aren't being heard, and so I don't want to get on the south side of science over biases for the striped bass fishery. And I had actually hoped that I had time to kind of put together my thoughts on this. I wanted to get up with JMAC on, what kind of technical group can we get together to review the success, the failures, and I guess what are possible predictors. I think the reform initiative might also help us. The explorations through that group may also help us on what we can possibly predict with, when we go forward, showing what we think are potential reductions. So I do think it's something that we should revisit, and it's something that should come back through that policy. I think it will take some work. I don't think this is a board work group type thing. I think this is a technical type work group that can bring some information to either the policy board or whatever, if we think it has to be species specific. But those are my early thoughts. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate those comments. Any other hands, Tina?
Richie.
Before I go to Richie, anybody else from the executive committee?
Jason also. Jason, and now Pat Gear.
I'll go Jason and Pat, and then I'll come back to members outside of the XCOM. Jason. You're muted, Jason.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. There, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, just appreciating both Dennis's and Joe's comments. Just a couple of quick. I agree with Joe. I think at least for parts of the discussion yesterday, I was thinking about. I think there's things we can do in the short term, like looking back and success and failure. I don't know if that's the way we should think about it, but maybe more in the context of how close did you get? Did this CE get to what it was trying to get to? And I think in the short term, that's relatively, I'm sort of wincing a little bit, but a relatively simple analysis where we can kind of make a judgment on how good we are at these things and what sort of precautionary buffer we might need. It just gives us something rather than just making up a number like 10% or 5%. Really the optimal way to do it, just to kind of put this on the radar, is to do, this is the exact type of thing a management strategy evaluation is built to do. And so that might be something for the future, is to take a subset of commission species and run a management strategy evaluation on conservation equivalency. And it would be super complicated. I'm not going to sugarcoat it to do something like that, but that's how you would get at that really robust understanding of the uncertainty and how you should be treating it. And so all of that is just meant to say that I agree with Joe that it's kind of at least parts of it are technical and highly technical, but probably worth pursuing at some point.
Thanks, Jason. Pat Gear.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Joe. I mean, I think it's a technical group would be better, and I would probably suggest maybe looking at tasking the Management and Science Committee for this, you know, or a subset of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually not a bad thought, Pat. Any other executive committee hands before I go outside the group, and then I'm going to ask Bob Deal to weigh in.
I don't see any other hands other than Richie.
Great, Richie, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, something certainly changed in my perspective yesterday in striped bass, and that was new to me, that the PDT said that we'd be unable to determine accountability, you know, I think that gets to the heart of the public's concern about conservation equivalency, because we had a clear public message on striped bass that the public does not trust our process and does not trust the outcome and doesn't trust that conservation equivalency is working. And now it turns out that we can't prove one way or another, evidently, whether it is working or it isn't. So I think there's two pieces to this. I think the scientific piece, for sure, needs to be a big part of it, but there also needs to be a piece of getting the public to understand and to accept whatever it is we go forward with for a policy. So I think there's two parts to this, because the public clearly now does not trust conservation equivalency in striped bass, and you know, we need to correct that. So thank you.
Thanks, Richie. I have a few thoughts on how to potentially move forward, but I'm going to let Bob jump in with his thoughts, because we touched base on this a week or so ago. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Appreciate it. Yeah, you know, this isn't terribly insightful, but I'll say it anyway. You know, conservation equivalency, as everyone knows, is kind of the double-edged sword of ASMFC. You know, one of the underpinnings of the Atlantic Coastal Act and why it works to some degree is that the states are given flexibility to implement the standards approved by the management boards. And, you know, the question ultimately is, how do you provide that flexibility to the states while not diluting any of the fishery management objectives and the standards that are in those plans? And that's a really difficult balance. I think, you know, I wouldn't characterize conservation equivalency as, you know, wholly unsuccessful. You know, if you look at striped bass yesterday, you know, given the data that we have now, which may change, and all the other caveats we heard yesterday, you know, the states achieved the 28% or achieved the 18% reduction, and in fact, maybe as high as 28%. So, you know, there are examples where historically there are examples where, you know, on paper things look like they added up and should work, but then when we implemented those, they didn't work. And there's a huge range of reasons why. Is it fishing effort? Is it availability? What is it? And that's the confounding factor here that makes this really difficult, and why the PDTs struggle with the sort of accountability part of this. Is, you know, the question is why? Were the regulations not correct, or was there something else that occurred that you know, impacted the ability of those regulations to achieve what we were shooting for? So it's a complicated question. I think, you know, the strategy previously has been, you know, as Pat and others have said, you know, we had the conservation equivalency document that was updated a few years ago, and that sort of set the structure for all of the conservation equivalency activities as far as timing and reviews and everything else that goes into it, as well, and the analyses and other things. But, you know, there are a number of examples within the FMPs where boards allow different things or provide a different structure to conservation equivalency for example, in the lobster plan, there's certain things that just cannot be modified. They have to be coastwide. They cannot be adjusted through CE. And, you know, is that good or bad? I don't know. You know, it made sense to the lobster board at the time. And so I guess where I'm going with all this is, as Jason and Joe said, it's technical and we need to sort it out. If you want to bounce this to the Management and Science Committee, which seems reasonable, I think they'll need a pretty detailed charge. In other words, it's probably not fair to them to just say, hey, fix conservation equivalency and make it better. You know, we'll need, you know, what exactly does the executive committee or the policy board want at the end of this process? Is it a one-size-fits-all conservation equivalency program that could be spread across all of our FMPs and ultimately would supersede what's in the FMPs, or is it just sort of more guidance and more detail in the document that we do have, and then boards can tweak things individually? So, you know, there's a lot of moving parts here. It's a really big issue, but, you know, I think, as I said at the very beginning, flexibility for the states is important. You know, the example of what works for North Carolina on summer flounder probably does not work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and vice versa. So, you know, there's when we're dealing with such a broad range along the coast, some flexibility and changes probably are needed, frankly, to allow the states to implement their regulations. But how do we do that without diluting the measures and make sure that we achieve the rebuilding or ending overfishing or whatever the goal of that action may be? So sorry I talked for a little bit, Pat, but, you know, management science is probably a reasonable group, but we just need to make sure we give them, you know, pretty good guidance on exactly what we hope to achieve.
Thanks, Bob, for that. Kind of fits into with what I was thinking with the potentially interim, maybe one or two interim steps before it gets there. I understand Tom Fody has his hand up. Tom, do you have a quick comment on this one?
Yeah, it's a quick comment. I guess I heard differently from what Richie heard, because what I heard from the comments from the technical committee yesterday was they can't predict the probability the same way they have a hard time predicting the probability of what rules and regulations will happen next year. And that's why we don't do accountability for rules and regulations that we put out to the states involved, because they follow the rules and regulations. But it's a fully changing atmosphere, and as Bob has pointed out, as a number of people have pointed out, conservation equivalency is supported by many New Jersey fishermen overwhelmingly, because we've been able to do things that basically are better, whether it's summer flounder, black sea bass, or scupper for our state. And every other state has done it, including Rhode Island, including down in North Carolina, and including Maryland. We look at what helps our fishermen stay within the boundaries of what we need to do. Now, we need to stay within the boundaries. If we need to take the reduction, we need to take the reduction. And if there's a better method of doing that, I'm open and supporting it, but it's not a bad thing. Conservation equivalency was put in because we unfairly impacted states. We put in coast-wide regulations, and we try to figure out how do we fix that.
Thanks, Tom. I think it just highlights the complexity of this conversation going forward. But considering our current policy has not been reviewed since 2016, and we have this renewed interest around CE, I think it certainly stands that now would be a good time to roll up our sleeves, take a look at the minimum, take a look at the policy, determine if we need to make any changes. I've been an ardent supporter of CE, but honestly, with striped bass, my changing has been thinking over the last few meetings, especially with some of the advice out of the PDT or thought comments from the PDT, because I still, while it's a probability of success, it's still accountability at the end of the day. And while we're not moving in that direction, I think we need to think about how it works, not only for striped bass, but for the rest of the species. Getting back to what Bob said, I think we have a situation where I agree with that just turning it over to the Science and Management Committee without some additional work probably wouldn't bear a lot of fruit here. I think we need some additional technical review. I liked the comments that JMac had made around that, and I'm wondering if we shouldn't have at least one, if not two, interim steps where maybe a small subset of our executive committee and a few others that have raised the issue maybe come together with a small work group and then come back to the executive committee, potentially even before the annual meeting. And then at some point, maybe we can, depending on when the next Science and Management Committee is going to meet, I think they do meet at the annual meeting usually, maybe there's something we could advance to them to initiate the discussion. Any thoughts from the Executive Committee on that approach?
Pat, Dan McKiernan has his hand raised.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I agree that the Management and Science Committee is the right group for this. I've personally been concerned about some of the conservation equivalency actions, especially where a state puts in a conservation equivalency request based on the projected impacts of a conservation measure. And when that conservation measure is dependent on MRIP, and MRIP, we know, has fairly large error bars, and especially when you shave the MRIP down to a wave level, I think it allows some deviation that might feel good, or it might satisfy constituents, but at the end of the day, it may not be an accurate depiction of those outcomes. So I think it really is a great task for the Management Science Committee, because a lot of that depends on precision of some of the data and the projections of impacts.
Great, thanks, Dan. Any other hands, Tina?
Spud.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I guess just sort of to help us put all this in context is, now we're sort of looking at probably the third leg of the commission stool. We've got a work group looking at allocation, which is one of our fair and equitable allocations is one of our basic principles. We've got a work group looking at de minimis, which obviously is another one of our valuable principles, is the ability to grant de minimis status to states. And now we're going to look at conservation equivalency. So we're really looking at foundational elements of the whole commission, and it's we've got all those other processes ongoing, and it might be good for us to put some thought into when do we want the deliverables from these respective work groups to come back to us, so we can make decisions about whether things are actionable or not. And it's just something to be, I think, for all of us to be cognizant of. We have a tendency to form work groups and specialty groups, and we send them off to do their work. And we need to remember there's a point where we need to bring whatever they've decided back to us. So just want to throw that out there for our collective wisdom.
Thanks for that, Spud. I think that's a really valuable comment. We do have a lot of legs of the stool, as Spud mentioned, that are being looked at right now that really are foundational. This one in particular. Any thoughts about a small group subset of the executive committee, and with some from the outside of the executive committee, to kind of flesh this out a little bit and maybe revisit this at one of our interim calls?
I think that's a good idea, Pat. And if necessary, this rabble rouser would volunteer to be part of it.
Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate that. I think instead of just asking for volunteers right now, maybe if you could send an email to, including, we've got Dennis, but if you're interested in being on this committee, can you send Bob and I an email? We'll put together a small subgroup of this and set up some calls, if that sounds like a reasonable approach. Hearing no objections, if you guys could just send some emails volunteering, that would be great. Oh, I see an email from Joe and from Jason already. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. That's a joke to everybody else. but I think it would be great to have you guys involved if you're willing. I think that covers our agenda here for today. Last call for any additional items. No hands, Tina, I'm assuming?
No hands.
No hands, great. Well, listen, I appreciate everybody's time and attention. This meeting went fairly quick. The next meeting on the agenda today starts at 10:15. Summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. So I'll get a little bit of a break before that. I appreciate everybody's time here this morning. And again, want to welcome Kathy Rawls to the commission. And we look forward to meeting you. We look forward to meeting you at the next meeting. So with that, I am going to call the meeting adjourned at 9:02 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hey, Tony and Maya, I'm going to run out and take about an hour break, and I'll be back unless you guys need anything from me right now.
No, Tina, I'm good. And I'll get people logged on. I'll start doing people's audio checks at probably like 10.
Awesome.
Maybe.
And I don't know if Maya's here, but I'll get her to put the slide up too.
Jeff, I think you are, Jeff, you want to be an organizer?
No, I don't need to be an organizer today, but Tina, during your break, would you mind giving me a quick call?
Sure, I'll call you as I head out.
Thanks.
Maya, are you here?
Yep, I'm here. I'm gonna put up the presentation
Sounds good.
in just a few seconds.
Yep, all good. I was just curious. I was like, oh, maybe she very well could be taking a break right now. All good.
Tony, you still there? This is Tom Fody.
I am here, Tom. What's up?
Yeah, after going through yesterday's striped bass meeting and a number of meetings going on in the future and in the past, I noticed the first day we had actually a break scheduled for the meeting. Well, you know, there was we supposed to sit there for 3.5 hours at the striped bass meeting without a break because there's no break on the agenda. And unless you put a break there, some of the chairmen are not stopping for a break. And 3.5 hours to sit in a chair without basically leaving is a pretty long time, and especially when the meeting runs 4 hours. I looked at the agenda for most of the other meetings, and the only one I saw was the first day that had a break schedule in it. Maybe it'd be advantageous to put a break in the meeting so at least the person running the meeting would actually have to say, well, we can't take a break right now.
Yeah, we were going to put a break into striped bass, but then we reassessed how long we thought it would take, and therefore we didn't put one in. So when we have longer meetings, I do try to put a break in there. Sometimes it just gets squished, but I'll, for Menhaden this afternoon, I'll see if I'm trying to remember exactly how long that board is off the top of my head. I take it board meeting to board meeting, Tom.
Yeah.
I'll see if we can squeeze in a quick break.
Yeah, I mean, some of us have bad backs or have to do other things that needs a 5 minutes to get up and walk around. Otherwise, we get up in the chair, we're stiff as boards. I mean, and
you just stand, get up out of your chair while the meeting's going on. That's what I do.
But also, when you go continuously, and that's one of the reasons that the military, who's made many studies over the years, says that any kind of meeting you run needs to have every meeting runs more than an hour and a half. There's a 10-minute break. And so we need to get up, get some fresh air, think, and then sit back down again. or even get into discussion around the table that's not there now. Now we're doing these meetings virtually. Otherwise, we would do that. If somebody would raise their hand and says, we need a break right now.
We'll try to get a break in for 5 minutes during Menhaden. It's a little longer, so Curry just reminded me. So we'll see if we can squeeze one in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
For us old guys.
No problem. But I still suggest you get out of your chair in the middle of that meeting. Pace the room a little.
Well, Sprite Pass, it's hard for me to get out of the chair.
Stay within the realm of the computer, but just do a little walkabout.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.